This is Lori Elliott with Conceptual Lee. Welcome to Module 5, Seed Model. In this particular module, we're going to focus on learning about the business model. Finally, we're there. Now, just before we start, I want to remind you that this is a recorded version of a live workshop. However, because it is recorded, it is adapted for use with a facilitator or for you to use this individually. So that means that you may be going through this with a facilitator in a workshop, or you may be doing this by yourself, online or offline. Now for this particular module, as I said, it's an introduction to the business model, which, when it's well formed, we call a seed model. This is the seed we talked about earlier in this workshop. Recall that a seed is something that has the power to propagate, to replicate, to grow, and to produce value, just as you hope your venture will be able to do. Unless you've already developed a business plan and you've been doing this for a long time, and even then sometimes, more than likely you are nowhere near developing a business model on your own. Now let me just make this quick comment. People don't understand often the difference between a business model and a business plan. The business model is the logic of how your business makes value. The business plan is just a report, a document that actually lays out your business model. So oftentimes people are asked by funders to give them a business plan. But what they don't realize is just putting something together does not make your business of interest to funders. It is the business model and all of the supporting systems that you need to have in place. So what we're looking forward to is sharing to you what we've learned in this process, because just as you, as many of you, we've also had those ups and downs. And we also did not always have the knowledge that we have now. We learned by experience, through trial, through error, through pain, until we realized what the key was to unlock the resources and the funding and other things. And it's very simple. It's a mature business model. So in this module, you'll see what is involved in ideation during the final part of the idea stage, and the beginning part of the concept stage of the cultivation engine methodology. We do this by drafting an initial seed model for a venture. Now we actually start this in this module, but we actually continue this through the rest of the workshop. This model will focus on what the seed model is and how to work with it. This module will ensure you have the overall understanding needed to develop your seed model. Subsequent modules will take a deeper dive. Now let's take a look at the workshop agenda for today. Module 5 is an introduction to the seed model and a discussion of the business ecosystem that you will need to research and document for your seed model. This tool will help you analyze, develop, and articulate the major internal and external aspects of your venture. We will also discuss what business ecosystems are and how central they are to your venture. You will see how the seed model canvas can help you convert your idea into a solid concept. In Module 6, we will focus on understanding the basics related to solutions, as well as to draft the solution component of the seed model canvas. In Module 7, you will work through other key parts of the seed model for your venture. Module 8 previews the next steps you will need to take in the cultivation engine process. There will also be a workshop debrief at the end of the day. So now let's just go back a little bit. In fact, really back to the beginning of the workshop. And just to debrief what we did yesterday, we're going to have a discussion, but first I just want to go back to the very, very basic concepts that we started with. What is the difference between an idea and a concept? So take a few moments, put me on pause and think and write down what you believe an idea is and what you believe a concept is. And I will come back and I will debrief it with you. So hopefully you've had plenty of time to figure out what is the difference between an idea and a concept. And what I want to do is I just want to share just a few ideas. Remember, we don't have to have a precise definition, but we want to have a general sense of the difference between an idea and concept. And so some of the things that my team and I either thought of or found reference to is that an idea is the start of a possibility, a thought about how to solve a problem, and the beginning of something to create. On the other hand, a concept is the construct of something plausible that will grow. Starting foundation to execute a plan and a high-level blueprint. So hopefully you can see the difference. And as we've talked about the metaphor, an idea is like the DNA of a seed, whereas a concept is actually the structure, the form of that seed, correct? And a well-formed concept is a seed because then it should have the power to propagate. Now let's take a look at other topics that we covered in day one. And we're going to do this by doing a discussion. And so you are going to actually put me on pause and the facilitator will work through the discussion with you. And then afterwards, I will come back and I will again do a debrief. If you're doing this on your own, you can just pause and write your own notes and then put me on play again. Well, surely you had a lively discussion about what you learned in day one. And so basically what we're going to do now is we're just going to focus on recapping what day one covered. So first of all, let's look at what it was. What is an idea? You learned what an idea is and saw some examples. An idea is a mere thought or suggestion about a possible course of action. You may have thought about it a lot, but you still must be able to elaborate it in such a way that it can be feasibly implemented. You learned what a concept is and saw some examples. A concept is a full embodiment of an idea with parts that relate to one another and that represent the basic characteristics of a set of objects in one's mind. For example, you can create a business concept or model that describes a way to run a farm machinery repair shop for certain customers under certain conditions. We also explored the steps of the value creation process, similar to growing plants from seeds. A seed or concept grows into a plant, which is a mature concept that multiplies, transforms, endures, and creates fruit, meaning value for the benefit of others in its environment. We also talked about people in markets. The first part that we talked about was the fact that the challenge in your life is to discover your personal identity, which is something you will pursue throughout your life. You don't find it all at once, but during the pursuit, you can continuously fulfill your purpose and destiny. Everything flows from personal identity, creativity, innovation, success, and significance. Your core identity is who you are. It is the seed of your potential. Your full identity unfolds over time if you work with it and diminishes if you don't. The three main dimensions of personal identity are what are you born with, your life path, and defining moments in your life. Different kinds of influence on personal development include your biology, growth and maturation, bodily functions, and the environment or context. Even how you reflect on your life can impact your personal development. There are also family, community and culture, society, and global influences, as well as individual, team, tribal, city, corporate, organizational, and country national levels and transnational levels of identity that actually blend into all of our spaces, okay, and impact us, and we also impact them. Your spirit is unleashed as your identity becomes more visible and powerful. You have the power to overcome many challenges caused by your environment and within yourself. As you understand who you really are, not just who you or others think you should be, you will see things in your life begin to align for good. You develop greater integrity in all aspects of your life. When this happens, it positively impacts your entrepreneurial abilities, and it helps you develop your idea and venture. It works the same for people that you serve, your market. Understanding the basics of human nature is a key element in this journey. And let me also say that the entrepreneurial journey is very challenging, though. But it is for everyone, because we all were created to be creators. Now, we also talked about the new construct for economies. And that is because, and it's not necessarily new, but it's new because we're re-emphasizing it. But we need this new construct because people really are the focus of the economy. They are the center of the economy. Remember, without people, there would be no economy. Everyone has a unique identity and purpose that influences their needs. Purpose and destiny drive needs. Needs go beyond basic needs like shelter and food. Needs actually create wealth, and wants destroy them. For each person's unique personal path, their unique needs must be met to achieve that person's purpose and destiny. As people change and their needs evolve, shifts in the market are created. Unique needs affect markets by allowing for infinite combinations of opportunities, by evolving over time, location, situation, etc., and by contributing to turbulent and chaotic markets. Technology, including the internet, is accelerating change ever more rapidly. Technology advancement is enabling people to explore their identity and travel very different life paths than in the past. This creates chaos, turbulence, and continual change. We can see how experiences with social media, video calling from phones and devices, etc., have transformed our society and people. Technology is also changing how people engage with each other, some good and some bad. People's unique evolving needs are totally intertwined with economies and markets. You must understand how people and their needs interact with the economy and markets to realize a sustainable venture or project. We also covered ideation, and this was in Module 4. Idea cultivation goes from idea to conceptualization, but does not include the proof of concept stage. So it's very important that when we talk about ideation, we're talking about it in terms of the idea cultivation process, which is the very earliest stage for when you're developing an idea. It really is extracted from the creationeering process, which goes from idea to proof of concept. Idea cultivation allows people to accelerate developing a concept, which can later be improved upon and developed as a venture. So we've actually carved out idea cultivation from our larger, our larger system. The ideation stage has these steps, which can be iterative. Generate ideas, state a challenge for each idea, research each idea, shape solutions for each idea, and develop an idea definition for each idea. Ideation tools and techniques include brainstorming to help you generate a list of problems that need a solution, challenge statement technique to help you generate possible solutions for identified problem, problem to possibilities matrix to help you sketch the problem and possible solutions, stakeholder analysis worksheet to help you identify and describe the people involved or affected by the problem, and customer profile tool to help you describe a primary customer for your solution. Now that's it for a recap right now. If you have any more questions, the facilitator will put me on pause to go through those with you, and then I'll see you on the other end. Now let's take a look at our module objectives. And if you do not understand any of these terms after the module objectives, the facilitator will pause and take notes, but always remember that we do explain all of these different terms as we're going through. If you find at the end of a module that we have not discussed them, then please remember to bring those up so that we can clarify and define them for you. So in this module, we're going to first review the ideation stage of idea cultivation. Then we'll go over the definitions and characteristics of business models. I will then introduce the components of the Stratos Seed Model Canvas tool. Then you will be able to practice using the Seed Model Canvas tool to research and document aspects of a business model. And we will end up continuing in more depth and practice with this tool in the remaining modules of this workshop. And finally, I will define and characterize business ecosystems. Now, looking at the idea cultivation process, it has 3 stages, and that includes ideation, idea transformation, and conceptualization. Now, ideation is the leftmost circle. It sets the baseline for your venture idea, but only takes you partially into the idea transformation process. In fact, it doesn't actually even take you really into it. Remember, things kind of overlap because it's iterative in nature. You can use our idea roadmap, which we will introduce in the last module, to keep track of your work as you develop your idea. Gaps will show up prominently on the roadmap, making it easier to know what still needs to be done to move toward a full concept. You can use it with the Seed Model Canvas. Next, after you do the ideation, you go through idea transformation, which helps you move from elaborated idea toward a full concept, right? And basically at this stage, you're able to put together an initial concept on your way to a full concept. The conceptualization process now involves moving from initial concept to full concept. This generally precedes proof of concept. So there's actually different levels or layers of maturity in a concept when you go from idea to a concept. So keep that in mind. Sometimes I will use the term very generically concept, but it depends on what stage you are and how much work you've done on your venture or on your idea before we can determine if your concept happens to be a seed that's ready to be planted, right? So again, just keep these metaphors in mind. So let's review where we are now in the workshop. As I said, we are still in the ideation process, and we're not going to get out of that actually in this workshop, but that does help you transition from idea to concept. It's just that when we finish with this workshop, you'll just be getting to doing your initial seed model and having an idea roadmap. And so you're not really even getting to the point where you're doing your initial concept. So essentially, this is prepping you for the other work that's coming down the pike. It's making sure that you have those firm foundations. Again, this workshop starts you on the road, but does not cover idea transformation or conceptualization. However, we have subsequent workshops that can take you all the way through. So let's look at the ideation stage of the ideation process, or rather ideation stages. Okay, first of all, we did generate ideas, state challenge for each idea. We also researched the idea. Now we're going to focus on creating that initial seed model, and really that is pretty much for the rest of the workshop. And then at the very end, we'll talk about the idea roadmap. Now just let me give you an example of the idea roadmap. And again, this is where you would make a note of where you might start to look for funding, or where you're looking out towards, moving your idea to. And again, we have a process, we have a methodology that gives you the discipline to create new things, okay? It does not impact the content of what that is. It is not limited by sector, by type of business, by country, anything like that. This is literally the underlying system structure. Just like with our bodies, all of our bodies have the same systems, correct? But each of one of us, because of the DNA, remember the DNA of the seed, right? The DNA are unique, even though we have the same bodily functions, the same body systems. And that's really how our methodology works. So you can have a very unique, idea, and it can be amplified through the discipline that we have within our methodology. But just on this example, when we're talking about looking for funding, one of the big mistakes that people make when they are looking for funding is that they look for it too late. Certainly, institutions will not fund your idea this early, but knowing where you can go to get the funding is important, because you will need to learn about their funding application process and also discover other resources such as government sector or private sector programs. All of those will require some process to access available resources. So using these tools also as part of a research process to learn about your ecosystem, to learn about the environment, to learn about the various things that are available to you is a good way, a very good way to accelerate your funding acquisition process. The best thing, however, to accelerate that is to have a mature business model, okay? The point of using these planning tools is not simply to obtain a specific funding resource, however, but rather to discover the information required to plan ahead strategically for ways to combine different forms of funding and resources that you may need at later points in your venture development. Again, the point is to look ahead and prepare for that. Okay, and one of the biggest problems that we see in this process of maturing ventures is that most entrepreneurs, even those that have quite a bit of experience, really don't have a clear understanding of what the next steps are, what needs to be, where the gaps are. Okay, now they may be able to tell major things. For example, I don't have the right management team. I don't have the right supplier. Okay, and those are important questions to answer. But as you'll learn, there are many different aspects of a seed model or a business model. There are many different layers to an organization. And so having a system that fully looks at these different parts so that you can put them together so that they work in a sustainable fashion actually becomes a very strong asset for your organization. Now, again, let's just focus again that this is all still about the ideation stage. Every single bit of this is ideation stage. So now we've been talking about business models, right? A lot about business models, and we've been correlating that with a seed. But again, I just want to emphasize that a seed model is a well-formed concept, something that is ready to propagate, to reproduce, to produce value. Okay, so you can have a business model and it can be in all shapes and forms, okay, but it does not necessarily mean it's a seed model, okay? But let's get to looking at what a business model actually is. Just a few points before I dig into this definition of a business model. Earlier we said a business model is a seed. We learned that a seed has DNA and elements that, when planted, help it grow into a plant. Okay, and again, just remember, that's the basic thing that we're emphasizing. You're at a stage before you plant it, before you do a pilot, before you go to market launch, you are actually creating the seed. Okay, you're creating the seed that's going to be planted. And this is something that most people don't quite understand. You have to formulate that before you can put it in the field. You can certainly build as you go There's a lot of different ways to do it. But the point is that at some point, all of the pieces have to begin to come together. Even if you don't follow this process that we have step by step by step, the way we've laid it out, that's okay. Okay, as you gain more experience, you'll learn how to, flip things around and still use the process and adapt it. But the key thing is that you first have to create the seed before you can plant it, creating that right seed. So the seed, or its DNA, an internal framework that you're developing for your venture, is interdependent with the environment and vice versa. The environment is certainly not very impacted by the seed alone, but as it grows, the resulting plant can make a difference to the environment. For example, when a seed becomes a full tree, it can provide shade, possibly fruit, and a place for birds and other animals to live. It can also change which plants can survive around it. As your venture grows, you may hire more employees, which ultimately can have a significant impact on in the communities in which you operate. Your business model can impact other business models, even if that's not your intent. For example, a few people doing the same thing can only do so much in the same space. Competition can drive down profit and margins. People's unique configurations also impact the industry and affect the character of the business and how it grows. Okay? So also, now looking at this definition, a business model is to describe, the purpose of a business model is just to describe how a venture logically creates a reciprocal exchange system of value for stakeholders. One type of reciprocal exchange is buy-sell transactions between your venture and customers. Typically, you exchange a good for money, but a good can be exchanged for many other things. For example, a good for a good. That illustrates bartering. Also, a good or service is not the only value that people can get, so the term value needs to be viewed more broadly when defining a business model. So when we talk about characteristics of the business model, it includes that it should be stated in terms of perceived benefits or reduced costs. Okay? It should be transparent or clearly disclosing as to whom value flows and how it flows. And one of the things is that when it talks about being transparent, it's transparent to the people who need to know, internal to your organization, maybe certain partners. This does not mean transparency by making it public. There's a difference, okay? A business model describes a venture with an appropriate exchange of value delivered over a time frame longer than a single transaction. The reciprocal exchange described here occurs in the context of ongoing relationships of those engaged in the transactions. It's not just a one-time event, as in transaction-based value exchanges. This distinction makes a big difference in marketplace dynamics and economics. When we begin to recognize stakeholders and various forms of value as business model components, we can get a far more complex and comprehensive view of the market and also of how a venture can produce growth, benefits, and sustainability for its stakeholders. Now, I'm just going to pause here for a moment. I just want to indicate that there are many different definitions of sustainability, and we will talk about characteristics of sustainability, but I think most people would have heard of the triple bottom line, which is profits, people, and the planet. Okay, but again, you can add to that. You can, not have it as you can expand on that. So sustainability is something that you may want to define for yourself in your organization. Here, though, we do add the element of inclusive economic development because we believe that, and that's part of the people category, but that's a top line thing to us. So for us, sustainability means that it is inclusive. Okay. Now we can see that this problem of oversimplifying value exchange in a common economy within much of today's entrepreneurial development and market environment. This problem exists because people define value exchange too rigidly and narrowly. If your definition of an economy is too transactional, what kind of venture will you create? It will very likely produce a business or venture that won't work well in the more complex real world and will be difficult or impossible to adjust in response to the current chaotic environment. And so it's interesting because most people say, well, oh, there are a lot of businesses out there that are successful. And I believe that's true in the sense, but there are a lot of large companies that have been around for a long time. They're struggling to configure themselves to continue to be competitive. And a lot of that has to do with how they've been structured in a way that is, yeah, I won't say it's not relevant because obviously still a lot of businesses are shaped that way, but they're designed in a way that does not flow with sustainability. And so it's almost like they're fighting from within, to be something different than they currently are when they're not fully moving in the structures that work with chaotic, dynamic environments. Okay, so there are a lot of companies, large and small, that are going through major transition right now. And it's not just companies, it's countries because things are changing. So, when you think of this, your thoughts, your mindsets, your perspectives, and definitions related to economics in the market will greatly affect your end results in creating a business venture or project. And I'll give you an example. We very much know, not just believe, that there is an infinite amount of resources because there is the human being involved. And human beings are able to innovate, even if there comes to a lack of a natural resource. Someone can create something to work around that, okay, or even bring the resource back to life. So for us, resources are infinite. But about every political system, about every economic system, and about every society is based on scarcity. And that is one of the key underlying problems with our economics today, because that is not the right frame of mind. And so we get scarcity because we focus on scarcity. We get poverty because we focus on poverty. And so there's so many different things that it comes with out of who you are. So if you are not growing, that means your company will more than likely not grow, or it will stagnate. Okay? So if you think of nature, everything in nature is supposed to flow. The water, a healthy system has a good flow system. And when we do not have the appropriate structure within ourselves, within our companies, within our society, we get stagnant. We get problems. We get stuck. Okay? And so every organism has a healthy flow system. And that's what economy is supposed to look like. And in order to have that, you have to have the right mindset. It has to be in the right place. So I won't lecture on that too much long, but I will tell you that you'll get more out of this if you can begin to work in a mindset of infinite versus scarcity. Okay, because our system works based on infinite, not on scarcity. Okay, so again, our approach to helping you develop your venture seed has a much broader focus, as I've been emphasizing, and perspective than many other approaches. Our broader approach helps you avoid putting limitations on your business idea at the beginning and allows for greater flexibility and fluidity and interconnection of different elements as it begins to grow. With our approach, you can always adjust to the internal factors and external environment of your business. Dynamic capability lets you take your existing business structure, if you have one, and resources and reconfigure them into something new that works better in the changed environment. So we won't go into capabilities, but one of the key things that keeps ventures healthy and moving is what they call dynamic capability. And it's really rooted in innovation, being able to continually innovate and move as the environment, as there's chaos, that you can keep moving, that you can keep creating new things, bring them to life, mature them, grow them, profit from them, so on and so forth. And that is a key capability that every organization needs to have. Every venture, every product, every idea. And basically, most companies do not have this. So when we see a lot of businesses going out of business, it's not just because their product, no longer works or there's competition. It's because they couldn't innovate. They could not maintain a level of dynamic capability. And this process that we've developed, it helps build that and embed it into your system, into your organization. Again, the process and discipline we've created and are sharing enables greater flexibility. You will still have challenges and be impacted by what occurs in the market, but you will have greater ability to handle market challenges and attain and maintain sustainability. Hopefully, your venture will be the one causing the change. Now, also, we have different levels of business models. And in fact, there are probably more than this, but these are primary ones that most people would understand. You can create a seed for a project, a process, a product or service, or even an enterprise as examples. The point is that, again, it's a very adaptable process. However, it's very important to define the scope of boundaries or boundaries for your seed. To set boundaries, you may need to answer questions such as, how big is the market? Where is the market located? Am I developing the seed for a specific culture or cultures or roles or professions? Once you decide on boundaries, you will know what to focus on for the seed model. Now, this is not a very clean process, by the way, because you get an idea, you see a problem that someone's having, you see a need, you see an opportunity, and you may believe that that particular customer or potential customer is the actual customer, but you find out later that's not really the case. You find out that the problem that you thought was a problem is not really the key problem. Okay, so a lot of this, it's very iterative, and that's why it's important to have a discipline, because you want to always be able to go back and work with what you know and what you understand and what you're discovering. Okay, now for example, in terms of deciding boundaries, you do need to know what to focus on. So for example, if you plant an apple seed, you won't get peaches. If you later determine that you would like to get into other areas, you can change your business model to get a new and additional result, or even create an entirely separate seed for that new product or service. And in actuality, you should be continually creating new business models, a new product line, a new process, a new business, because again, it's part of that dynamic capability. And all the things that we're showing you throughout all of our workshops and programs, it's basically giving you that capacity to have that innovation system in order to continue to produce new things. This kind of business model adaptation can occur more easily at a later phase of venture development if you make the boundaries for your seed flexible enough in the early phase. So that's one of the things we want to emphasize. You don't have all the answers at the beginning. In fact, you have very few. Okay. What I thought was going to be our business model, what was that? 13 years ago, 6-7 years ago. It's totally different, and not different in that the cause and the problem is still there, okay, that we're addressing, but what we actually have to implement to solve that problem and to serve the people is entirely different from what I thought when I first started. So, so when you do these boundaries, again, it's very important, but they are going to change. It's very unlikely that it's going to be the same as what you thought when you originally started. But you can start also with a very narrow space or focus, a simple product or service. We see a lot of that, particularly with technology, and that works, and then people begin to build on that. So that also works. But one of the things that you will have to understand is that customer expectations will have a lot to say about the boundaries and features of the product or service. So it's called the minimal viable product. the minimum that you need of features, for example, that you need to implement in order to get customers to buy your product. Okay? Even your challenge question can place a degree of boundaries upon the business model. So if you remember, we talked about having a one-stop shop, right, to work with entrepreneurs and funders as it relates to, venture development. Now, a one-stop shop is a much different boundary and bigger and broader and deeper boundary than just providing training. Okay, so that's an example of differences of boundaries. So the challenge question that we have has a lot to do with that. How do you get the right resources and funding and support to entrepreneurs at the right time in the right way, and so on, right? Well, training obviously would not answer that question, but the one-stop shop may or may not, right? So the challenge question, where you focus, becomes key also. But again, remember, all of this is iterative. So if you don't get it right the first time, you go back, which you won't typically anyways. Again, a lot of this stuff doesn't happen, it happens quickly, but it's iterative. And so with that, you just keep using the system, the methodology, until things start solidifying and coming together. Great. Okay, so the central question for a business model is this: how do we fulfill our purpose to serve our stakeholders in a sustainable way while making a profit and sharing the benefits with these stakeholders? Now, sharing the profits and sharing the benefits is not going to be 100% the same for everyone. Some stakeholders are indirect. They might just be the community, but the fact that there's a business that's employing people means that there's money that's flowing in the community. That's a benefit. Certainly, we want to generate plenty of revenue or profit to sustain what we are doing, yet the value we create is so much greater than monetary gain. When we plan wisely what to do with our seed, the venture starts generating positive value to our stakeholders and even to ourselves, because there is a reciprocal relationship. As you satisfy stakeholder needs, you will also receive value. Examples include more money, a good reputation, or a solid foundation to leverage stakeholders for further market opportunities. Remember, it's all about relationships and having a system that fosters a mutual exchange of value. Focusing on these things and sustainability do not change what you need to do to run a business, but how you run it. For example, consider borrowing equipment that you need from a stakeholder who has equipment sitting around. In exchange for a revenue share, this stakeholder might let you use their dormant equipment. While creating your seed, this central question should prompt you to ask, what different forms of value are possible? How can I make this venture sustainable for all of us? Now also, you won't achieve this goal of sustainability in one day, especially not while you are still working on your initial seed model, right? Or just the idea. But asking and answering this central question is part of the process you must undertake to eventually develop your full business model. It's the life or core question for your business. How do we keep this going? How do we keep increasing this and keep it moving so that it's not just a company that pops up one day and then in 5 years doesn't exist anymore? This really goes back to the purpose of why your company exists. This is not always easy to figure out until you have been in business a while, but it is something you have to address at some point. Your market can be great and your business can be the best thing out there. But what if a famine comes along, a famine comes along and literally wipes you out? And I mean a famine in the market, right? From what you learn in the process of becoming successful, the likelihood that you can plan another successful company to replace the failed one is higher than if you had never designed a business model in a sustainable way. So one of the things that we learned is that as individuals and as societies, we need to be resilient. There will be things that happen that we have no control over that can wipe us out financially. But you don't have to stay there. And that's part of the ability, the human spirit, and the ability to innovate and create and do things new, the ability to create and build and implement. So, we're in a place where it seems like things are impossible, or things that have happened to such a degree that you don't think you're going to get out. We have the power to create, and we have more power to create than we know or understand. But we have to focus, and we have to learn it as a discipline, because it's not something that people do automatically. They may want to do it, but again, there's a difference between the amateur and the professional athlete, right? Although today amateur athletes are pretty good as well. So, but the idea is that there's a difference. And so by having a discipline, it heightens your ability to move things along and to create these things. So now, after we talked a little bit about the business model and also the central question for the business model, let's talk about what sustainability is within a business model specifically. Sustainable business models focus on adding value to their stakeholders, environment, and society, rather than on the traditional practice of simply extracting value from them. This is very important, okay? Extracting value is what the majority of business models continue to emphasize today. If you listen to the news, you will hear about many companies that do exactly that. They just want to extract value. They want your money, they want your information, and they want to know your behaviors, because they know they can induce you to buy more. It's okay for your business to want something from customers by interacting with them, but the problem is in how you do it. The focus of such interactions should be more about adding value rather than the business just trying to extract value from customers and other stakeholders. Here are some characteristics of business models with sustainability built in. First, sustainable business models embed a future for the next generations. Sustainable businesses expect to be around for more than the short term. They don't plan to last only for the next few years so they can make a quick buck and then disappear. Clinging to the focus of maximizing profit or money for the short term is death for sustainability. This focus is a major mindset problem, but with a sustainability mindset, you can plan to be around for the long term, so your venture can continue to develop and grow and serve people and markets. Sustainable businesses see profit as gain or increase, and they view profit as existing in many forms, not just money. There are many different forms of value, and it is based on relationship with your customers or stakeholders. For example, profit in the form of good customer relationships can pay off later through customer referrals, which can result in more sales. Referrals also decrease the need to advertise and the cost of doing business. Now, when I think about how we work, pretty much we work on referrals and through relationship. And that's because, really there's actually more work for us than we can actually handle at any one time anyways. But with that, we empower. So in our culture, for example, we actually cultivate entrepreneurs instead of employees, which means that most of us in leadership, we're actually entrepreneurs and we take the risk that the business takes. And so by having that type of structure, we also get revenue share in the work that we do. And so it's a great incentivizer, but there's a lot of responsibility. And again, we're also taking the risk. But in doing that, we actually then create this ecosystem, not only for ourselves internally, but also our extended network of facilitators and liaisons and coaches, because basically they have a very similar model. And so as they have that experience and they're actually able to grow their business along with us growing our business, then they obviously refer others to us. Okay, and it becomes what we call a virtuous cycle. And it grows organically. We don't really even have to advertise. Now, certainly there's always a certain level of education and awareness, because when you have a new product that is unique, that is not like the others, then you know, it takes people a while to understand really what you do. And that's a typical challenge that companies have. And we certainly had it because we have a system that has a lot of parts. And so until people experience it, they can't really necessarily understand what it is. But now, you know, it has its own momentum, and that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for our venture, our idea, to have its own life. We support it, but it should have its own movement, right? And so that's what we're looking for. And so that's what you'll also be looking for in your venture as well. Now, do you have any comments that you want to make? If you have comments, then you can put this on pause in the facilitator and you can discuss. But let me just give you a few possible reactions to comparing a sustainable business model with the traditional understanding of a business model. In a marketing situation, when people are looking for opportunities to market their goods for services, the most sustainable approach is to focus on potential customers' needs rather than trying to create needs for them. Sadly, many businesses still try to engineer needs. Now, people can actually have latent needs, meaning needs that they don't realize that they have. So that's not trying to create needs. If you're trying to make people aware that they have legitimate needs and they need, and you have something that will help them with that. But again, it's more about, are we trying to control, are we trying to manipulate, or are we trying to serve? Okay, very, very different mindset. And when you have these different mindsets, you get different types of results. You can find problems in the gaps that may occur as a result of long-term effects and aspects of your offerings and how they interact with people and markets. If you think through the possible effects on people and markets of the problems you've already identified and of the solutions and processes you are building, you can find gaps that may allow you to innovate new solutions to help people and sustain your business even more. So that's really what we've done. When we first started with our business model, it still had quite a few parts, but what we're finding is that as we implement, there are other gaps that need to be filled, that we can now do spin-off companies, we can do spin-off products and services and solutions, we can go to different markets. And so it really, like I said, has a life of its own. And so all we're doing is trying to keep up. So that's a good feeling. And so, but this comes from a very, very deep understanding of our market and what we're in. There are a lot of other groups that have similar things, but they're not really in our niche. We're really what we call a life cycle accelerator model. There's a lot of different parts to that, but a core distinction is that many groups that are working with entrepreneurs in developing regions, for example, are focused on one of the stages. We're fully focused on the full life cycle. And so, we also believe that the entrepreneurs should own and drive their own venture. And so there's just a lot of different contextual differences or principles that we operate on. So we're actually carving out a unique space. And as we do that, we're also then finding other gaps. Now, maybe a good example is Amazon. They started out a while back, basically just, providing books online and a few other things. And you could buy books online, you could do a few other things, you could buy products. But now they have a full ecosystem and value chain that they've developed over these years. And they're eating up all these other different industries and major players. They're getting into groceries, they're getting into delivery, all sorts of stuff. But that was because they developed something where there was a gap, but they continued to be able to see as they were growing, they could find other gaps and other places that they could fit in, and service their audience. When you solve a customer's problem instead of simply extracting money from them, you make the person a hero in their environment, thus strengthening your relationship and motivating that customer to return the favor or help you in some way. To sum up, though, this definition of sustainable business models allows for a very long-term view of our business ventures, because we are not looking at profit as simply how to gain money or other short-term tangible opportunities. Okay. So there are also some other additional characteristics to a sustainable business model. And these include growth, multiplication, adaptation, and evolution or revolution. A sustainable business model is capable of growth. Example, suppose that last week I had 10 customers. Because they refer others to my business, this week I now have 25 customers. That's growth. A sustainable business should also be capable of multiplication. You may start with one product but get to a point where you now can offer different product variations or spin-offs of your original product. That's an example of a multiplication effect. The previous example about growth is also really multiplication. You cannot grow without multiplication. Adaptation is a business's ability to change as its environment changes. Keep in mind that evolution and revolution involve natural processes that businesses go through gradually or are focused to go through suddenly. Adaptation, on the other hand, is a conscious culture and process of choosing to shift or course correct as needed to adapt or adjust to changes in the business environment. The process of evolution occurs when a business changes gradually over time. Organizations can evolve based on the market, economic conditions, and their customers. Evolution is seen when certain underlying elements of a business model stay the same, yet a gradual change is occurring in other parts of the system surrounding the seed being created. For example, as generations of trees develop and evolve, the trees will change to adjust and survive better in the shifting environment they are experiencing. Businesses do the same. Then there's revolution, which includes dramatic change. Revolution is disruptive. It is not the same as building your business from scratch, but instead involves completely reconstructing it into something new. Not all businesses go through revolution, but most of them probably should these days. In fact, it's a good place to be in business since the disruptor typically carries a lot of weight in their particular market. These are the market leaders. You'll see a lot of larger or older businesses going through revolution because their old products and offerings are not aligned with current market conditions, and they need to change dramatically to stay relevant and profitable to avoid decay and death. All these characteristics of a sustainable business model allow an organization or venture to not only survive but thrive in the modern business environment, which is chaotic, turbulent, and fast-paced. Therefore, sustainable systems need to be built into the business model. This should not be an afterthought. You can begin to build sustainability into your business model at the idea and concept stages by consciously planning what to do in the face of factors you cannot control and for how to tweak the factors you can control to allow for long-term growth and resilience of your venture. And again, nothing is 100%. The uniqueness of your market, your industry, your internal capacity, your team, all of those things can actually impact how you are able to accomplish this. Some companies put a product on the market quickly without thinking through the next 3 to 5 years. They don't plan for growth, scaling, or adjustments needed over time to deal with knowable or possible challenges and market forces. If your initial product or offering fails, that does not mean your business has to fail. You can reorchestrate what you've learned and the assets you've developed so far into something that will be more successful in current conditions and that will sustain your business long term. In fact, as you develop new products and solutions over time, they may not look at all like what you started with or what you had planned. If you build sustainable characteristics into your business model, you will likely be more successful in adapting your organization with your new offerings and aligning them and your organization with current market conditions. So we've been talking about sustainability, right? We've been talking about the business model. We've been talking a lot about value and stakeholders. And so I just wanted to briefly just put this slide up to remind you of the value creation process, because underlying those relationships, you have to have that reciprocal exchange system of value, right? And so when we're talking about value, value is when something is a seed, it has very little value because it's not productive yet, right? And so we must be aware that when we're working with new ventures, that there isn't much value that is held within that, correct? And so we're not going to go through this in detail, but again, just keep this in mind. Value is very closely linked to your business model. Okay, so now let's talk about what is profit, because what happens is when you produce value, right, you're getting an exchange of value, and so therefore you're getting revenue, you're getting other things that are positive, okay? We know that profit is important, certainly in an economic sense, but it can have a broader meaning. Profit is a gain or positive increase of anything. In fact, profit is an addition of value. Profit can appear in many forms, such as those shown here. Profit can certainly manifest as an increase in financial capital or wealth, but profit can also be in the form of social or relationship capital, spiritual gifts or blessings, project resources, intellectual capital, political capital, and physical treasures or essentials, to name just a few. The point is that when creating a sustainable business model, we should not only look at costs, revenues, and profits in terms of money, we should also consider other forms of all of these things. As we begin to look at the actual business model, you will get a better understanding of how important all forms of profit are. Now, again, I just wanted to emphasize this concept of value. When we look at the cultivation engine cycle, remember that this is actually a system representing increasing value. When you first start with the idea, you have high risk and very little value. So therefore, investors are not typically going to put money in at that time. In fact, it's probably 99.9999%. Now, your family, your friends may, okay, because they like you. But if they're evaluating the idea, you know, as an objective person, they're going to say no. Now, someone can be nice to you and still give you a little bit of money to work on your idea. Okay, so that's not unheard of, but enough money to sustain you to get you to the point where you can begin to implement and service your market, that is highly unlikely. Okay, but the key thing here is that value increases as you go through the different stages, and so what you want to become is the architect or the artist that's able to increase value as much as possible and lower risk as much as possible. Okay, and that's what investors typically look for. Now, of course, there are other things that people consider valuable. If they're impact investors, it's not just about money. They certainly want the business to be sustainable, right? But they're looking at the significance or the impact of what you're doing, and not just the return on investment in terms of the monetary aspect. So, once you have an idea for a venture, you can begin to formulate your concept in greater detail using a map like this. And so what we've done is, in the ideation process, we've basically taken you through, if I was just thinking about an idea for a business, how would I actually get started? Okay, so we've taken you through most of the steps of ideation. And now in this module, again, we're talking about the initial seed model. And this is where you really begin to see your first structure around the concept that your idea is becoming. And that concept ultimately becomes proof of concept, a seed, and then ultimately can become a venture that is profitable and sustainable. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through this canvas for the rest of the workshop. Filling of this canvas shows what the seed you are creating looks like in detail. The boxes represent the components of your seed. Further into the conceptualization process, you will need to unpack the seed into components into more detail, because you must work with each component and see how they all interact. And some of that happens at the seed model canvas level, but most of that really happens at your concept document, and that's where you're able to fully narrate what your business model is in a limited amount of space. Easy way to say it. If you look closely, there's a heavier, bolder line that's around the center, starting from problem down to the right corner of benefits and revenue. And that is essentially the internal factors for your seed model. Okay. And that essentially is related to being actually the seed itself. Some factors in the center rectangle may appear to be fully or partially external to your venture. For example, channels and many stakeholders may not be part of the business or legal entity. For the purposes of working with the seed model canvas, they are highly critical to your venture and are thus internal to your extended enterprise. Okay, so they're not literally internal, but because they're a part of the core of you delivering that value, they're considered part of the internal factors of your success. You will have partners and other stakeholders that are really key to the success of your organization or venture. The components inside the center rectangle differ from the ecosystems and networks outside of it. So if you look at the bottom outside of that center part, you'll see ecosystems and networks. When we talk about ecosystems and networks here, these external elements are more general environmental forces, or they are ecosystems that you can interact with or that impact your business model. Your own industry or related organizations can also be external components. For example, if you are in the oil industry but you are not a member of OPEC, your venture can still be affected by oil price changes caused by OPEC policy changes. Changes created by seemingly peripheral ecosystems can dramatically impact you and other people and organizations. OPEC is an example of a peripheral ecosystem in this case, but you can still, again, feel its effects or impact. Now, each of the components can be phrased. So if you want to help yourself work through this, you can change the name of each component to a question. For example, what is the problem? To sum up, factors internal, seed, to an extended enterprise. And extended enterprises are those that have partnerships, key stakeholders, channels. You're not just insular to yourself. These are the internal factors are internal, and they are in the middle of the canvas, as I said, while the external, which is actually the soil, the environment in which you're going to plant your seed, surround the middle. So around that you see context, community, regional, national clusters, ecosystem networks, local, international, and value chains. The key for an enterprise is the ability to continue, or rather combine, the internal parts of your seed in harmony with the external environment, which impacts you, but you also impact it. What you're trying to do is create a greater whole, right, that swallows up the divides between the external and the internal. You want to create such a force that it's almost as if they're working together. Okay, and I know that sounds a little bit strange, but oftentimes we're trying to fight against the environment instead of creating something that causes the environment to shift and to work along with us. Okay, and so that's not something you'll gain or necessarily understand if you're a new entrepreneur, but if you've been developing different products and services successfully, you begin to, it becomes a part of the power that's within you to create. Okay, and so the goal is really not to see the environment as hostile, but knowing that no matter what it is, even when it looks dark, even when it looks bad, that there's something that's coming forth that's good, and that you have the ability as a creator to bring that forth. Okay? Now, before we get too far into the seed model, though, I wanted to remind you, I wanted to be very specific about this. I wanted to remind you that your first seed is yourself. As you cultivate and grow yourself, you will empower your venture to grow as well. So don't forget that. People seem to think that just the idea, you are the idea, you're the originator of that idea. And so as you grow and you understand who you are and your purpose and all of that, it begins to communicate and create power to develop the seed that we're talking about. Okay, so now that we've had a general overview of the Stratos Seed Model Canvas, we're going to do a brief activity just to give you an idea of the process of working with the Seed Model Canvas. So first of all, I want you to pull out the concept document outline questions, or if it's not in your pack, then you can download it. Take a few minutes, and I'll give you a few moments to do that, and then I'll go ahead and explain this to you. So again, if you look at the concept document outline, you'll see that except for the executive summary, it has a one-to-one correlation with every section on the seed model canvas. And the idea is that having these questions by section, they help you articulate and focus the development of your business model. These questions are actually used, again, to develop a concept document, one of the key outputs of the conceptualization stage. However, the outline is useful in helping you think deeper about your business model. So it's useful to generate your initial seed model as well. For this activity, we're going to use the same case study question. How do we provide entrepreneurs with the right tools, resources, support, and funding at the right time and in the right way? Now, refer to your notes from the problem to possibilities matrix yesterday, or rather the activity, and place existing information in the problem component on the seed model canvas. Okay? Then answer concept document outline questions from the problem section to expand on the problem component as much as possible. Then once you've done that, and it's probably better to write this on a separate sheet of paper, your answers, but then try to be concise and summarize all of the different things that you've learned, or you've investigated, or you've discovered, or you believe, and then concisely describe the problem on the seed model canvas. Because again, that's part of the reason why it's only one page or 2 pages, internal factors on one side and external factors on another, is so that you have to massage and work with it, and gain the essence instead of putting down every single word. Now you'll have 10 minutes to complete this on your own, and then we'll debrief. If there are any questions before we start this activity, as the facilitator puts me on hold or on pause, then you can ask the facilitator. Have a great time working on this. Put me on pause. Okay, so you put me on pause, and hopefully you got a good feel for what it is to work on. And again, this is a very brief activity because we're going to be working on this all afternoon, so you'll get more experience. But really, just working on that one section gives you the essence of, working on the first initial seed model. Now, for every section, you'll do the same thing. We'll go through that, and you'll have activities, and we'll explain more about each section as we're working through all of this. But the key is, once you've gotten all of the sections worked through, and again, you don't even have to be this detailed to start. We're giving you the concept document outline to maybe accelerate your process. But oftentimes you can just write down what you understand and know right now about your seed model. And when you do it that way, you begin to see where gaps are. You can still see relationships. You can see how one thing feeds into another. So again, you don't necessarily have to use the concept document outline in your first attempt. But we do suggest that you use those questions because they really help you think this through, analyze, and prompt you about what you should be researching, right? And looking for and considering and solving, right? So it helps you navigate this maturation process. Okay, so for this debrief, I want you to think about what came to mind as you worked through the questions on the problem section of the concept document outline in the seed model canvas. First question, okay, and again, the facilitator is going to put me on hold, so I'll just ask these questions and you will respond to the facilitator. Do you have a picture now of what it is like to begin developing a seed? Please describe that. And the second question, what other key aspects of the problem did you document based on this activity? Now, before the facilitator releases you to do the activity or rather the discussion, make sure that if you have any other comments or questions, that you keep those at the forefront of your mind as well. Okay, put me on pause, and then we'll move on to the next thing momentarily. Okay, great. So in this module, we've looked at the business model, and we've also looked at, we looked at defining and describing the business model, right? And then we actually did a little bit with the seed model canvas. And so the last part is talking about business ecosystems. Now, before I get into the definition, it's very important to understand why we are talking about a business ecosystem. Besides your venture, another important part of the equation to your success is a business ecosystem that supports your venture. This is closely linked to external stakeholders and relationships. In fact, we call this a stakeholder ecosystem. Let's unpack what a business ecosystem is, and you'll begin to see the importance of the business ecosystem to the venture. This description is written in economic terms, but just understand, and we'll investigate this a little bit later, that an ecosystem does not have to be economic. Here we are defining a business ecosystem as a community of stakeholders. It's an economic community supported by a foundation of interacting organizations and individuals who are also members of the ecosystem, or in other words, the organisms of the business world. The point made here is that an ecosystem is a living system. It's not mechanical. You cannot control all of it, even if you can control certain parts of it. In addition to business founders, partners, staff, and customers, ecosystem member organizations also include suppliers, lead producers, competitors, and other stakeholders. Now, some additional information or things about ecosystems is over time, business ecosystems co-evolve their capabilities and roles and tend to align themselves with the direction set by one or more central companies. So that means, for example, that in different industries, for example, like tech, Silicon Valley, it's led by certain big companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, right? They drive, or in the past at least, they had driven a lot of the the things that were advanced in the Silicon Valley or in the IT, in the IT sector. Here we are saying that a coevolution of businesses is occurring in the ecosystem. Because the businesses in the ecosystem are interdependent, they are developing together. The businesses are changing and creating together, whether that occurs informally or directly. There of course can also be downsides to business ecosystems as well. That is why this is important to ensure you are developing and participating in healthy ecosystems. And healthy ecosystems are robust, resilient, and diverse. A business should view its role as one of supporting its customers and suppliers in the ecosystem. And of course, then they're supporting you as well. The customers have a need that the business is trying to fill, and the business is giving its suppliers the opportunity to gain monetary or other value by enabling those suppliers to get their product into a particular market. The business may be adding value to customers in the market, but as the business succeeds in the market using its suppliers' resources, those suppliers are also benefiting. And again, this was just a simple example of the interdependency and how one supports another. Ecosystem leader functions are valued because members can move toward shared visions. So certainly, as the tech sector, first evolved, and it began to grow, particularly with Microsoft starting the real wave of that, in terms of personal computing or business computing, it ends up that Microsoft became a leader, then Apple has become a leader, and all of these different leaders. And basically, because they're leaders, there are actually some benefit to that. So what I'm actually trying to get at is that it's good if you can find this unique space in which you can be the leader. Okay, so there's advantages. Ecosystem leaders can benefit from these leadership functions through their ability to align their investments and find mutually supportive roles. Now, we're going to take a look at ecosystems or business ecosystems by using the metaphor of forest ecosystems, particularly just so we begin to understand this concept of what sustainability is. After we have looked at business ecosystems, but not from the perspective of business. That's why, again, we're looking at forest ecosystems. You'll be able to look at your business model differently, and you will ask yourself different and important questions. You will also use different criteria when considering options for solutions related to your business model. First of all, forest ecosystems contain value chains. In this case, they're food chains, and there could be possibly others as well. They contain both living and non-living actors. Also, there are individual and group actors. Ecosystem members include producers, those that produce, as well as consumers, those that consume, and decomposers, which transform waste from some members into nutrients that can be used for growth by other members, and also by seeds when they are planted. Forest ecosystems are very diverse. There are layers and subsystems within an ecosystem. In a forest ecosystem, the forest floor and treetops are examples of layers. In a business ecosystem, suppliers, customers, trade associations can be considered layers of subsystems. Trees are the lead actors in forest ecosystems. For example, when planted, a fruit tree seed can produce a fruit tree that can last for hundreds of years in the right soil, environment, DNA, and seed structure. Such a tree can produce fruit for a long time. Likewise, we can create businesses that will last far more than 10 to 20 years, maybe even centuries. Back to the metaphor. Forests change as the environment changes. Usually, forests and trees do change. For example, if the environment becomes too harsh, trees can starve and all or part of the forest starts dying. Nevertheless, there is typically a strong level of natural resilience and sustainability built into these forest ecosystems. Similarly, to create a resilient, sustainable business ecosystem, you need to embed a strong structure into your business seed. Now, we want to know about the role of trees because they're quite central to forest ecosystems. When you plan to grow a business, we can actually learn a lot from trees. What roles do trees play in forest ecosystems? They generate a life force for others because, for example, they create oxygen. They manage resources such as water. They provide a means for other organisms to grow. For example, they fertilize the soil. They also provide other benefits such as shelter, food, medicine, and many other things. They reproduce. They provide value to others in the ecosystem and beyond. Now consider how the canopy of trees, such as those in the rainforests, helps protect our climate. The existence of so many trees creates a balance and harmony in our earthly ecosystem. Now, as we've talked about the role of trees, I now want you to take this metaphor and translate this to, or speak to the correlation of this to a venture in the middle of a business ecosystem. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes and you're going to do this in pairs. So if you're in a live session, then facilitator, you can put me on pause. Okay, great. Now, some of you obviously in the discussion, you're going to share about what you have as a correlation, but I'll just give you a few things. So for example, Microsoft, and I'll use Microsoft as an example because it will also illustrate what happens with another type of tree that we'll get to momentarily. But Microsoft, when they first started, they really came about to have the first ecosystem of technology providers that provided their technology to the markets that supported and developed on their platforms. And so you can see here that in many ways, they had a very critical role. And so if we were doing a metaphor of a tree, they would be a very good example. They generate a life force for others, right? They provide means for others to grow. They provided a lot of other benefits. They create a lot of millionaires, and they reproduced. But you'll notice one thing: they were on the decline, but now they're on the upswing because they have a whole new strategy. Okay, so they figured out how to reconfigure themselves and focus on a new and improved strategy, and so they're gaining ground again. Okay, so they are demonstrating what a tree is in a forest ecosystem. They've created an ecosystem that's very robust, or let's say that they were a major contributor, one of the early contributors. And so now that's a very robust and resilient and diverse ecosystem when we talk about technology. Okay. Now, well, not necessarily my favorite tree example, but one of my favorites. I've known from a child about the great sequoias, but the first time that I really got a chance to visit was, probably 10 or 15 years ago. And it was amazing to see these huge, massive trees. I mean, it's fantastic. It's another world. You feel like, you feel like almost like a bug because the trees are just so huge. But when we look at this, I want you again to think of a metaphor of looking at how a sequoia relates to a strong, resilient lead business, okay, in a business ecosystem, okay? So the giant sequoia is one of 3 related species known as redwoods. They grow natively only in Northern California in the United States. Some of these trees have grown more than 300 feet tall. That's taller than a 20-story building. As you can see in this photo, the base can grow to 20 feet or more in diameter. And they can live for thousands of years, or they can live over 1,000 years. I don't know if it's a couple thousand or not, but over 1,000 years. So think of a company, okay, that has this type of strength. Now, the giant sequoia is the largest living thing on Earth and is one of the oldest living things. Sequoias are always green. They are evergreens. This reminds us how important it is to maintain a green state of sustainability. So to me, I just really mean like a green light. You know, it's good to go. And to find ways for the business to continually thrive. For example, thriving might mean pruning or trimming off dead or diseased parts of a tree or a business so it will continue to grow and live. Sequoias are able to withstand hardship and disease. They can withstand outside destructive forces and continue to grow. This is absolutely necessary for them to last as long as they do. Similarly, you want to build a system that allows the business to withstand destructive forces and challenges. You can build this into the seed. Now, you can't activate it or fully actualize it because there are many factors, right, of sustainability, but you can do some core principles and things that help your venture as it grows become sustainable and resilient. So when you do this, then when the business grows, it will begin to take on the characteristics designed in the seed. Remember now, when you plant a seed, it has everything in it. It has all of the DNA, has all of the substance, so it can grow and produce fruit. Okay, and so you want to do the same thing with your venture. A big part of building resilience into the seed is organizational development. How can you design the organization so that it can withstand challenges as the business grows? Startups struggle with this. For example, when they begin selling their product or service and can suddenly realize they haven't prepared the organization for dealing with product development, sales, and support, they now need to scale to keep up with incoming orders. If you continue to focus exclusively on the product, the result will be a weak root system, the organization that will be nurturing the growing business. As soon as a strong wind blows against the tree with a weak root system, it will fall over. The same with the business. Now, many startups begin strong or sprout up quickly, but their roots have not formed well. Then when they begin to have problems, they die out. So it's critical to design the right DNA into the business seed model at the start. If you want the business to develop a strong organization that can withstand the challenges that will likely arise, as the business grows, you can activate the required organizational characteristics and capabilities. The sequoias are also efficient stewards of their resources, as businesses should be. Though they are large and grand, these trees do not live alone. Rather, they are part of a complex association with other living things. In fact, their very existence depends on those interdependent relationships. They have more than one way to reproduce. Similarly, in business, you can have more than one way to create revenue streams or value. They can also withstand fire and flooding due to their massive size and strong design that stems from their DNA. They are built to withstand major challenges, and wouldn't you like to have a company that could do that as well? Particularly nowadays with all the turbulence and chaotic nature of our environment. Now, a mother tree is a tree that serves as the anchor or creator of an ecosystem. Because that tree is the oldest in the forest or some part of the forest, it was there first. So again, Microsoft to me is a mother tree organization because it was one of the first. Mother trees are the largest trees in the forest. They act as central hubs that connect the other trees in the forest. They also support and provide nutrients to younger trees and seedlings. You can think of the important dominant organizations in a business ecosystem as the mother trees in that ecosystem or environment. That could be your venture if you develop your own ecosystem. Now, I hope you can begin to see, and again, you might have to pause and sit back, but think about how you can create this sustainable venture. The business model aspects, the dynamics related to that, the aspects related to the business ecosystem. And again, just reminding you that you have your venture, but it needs a support ecosystem in order to be successful. So they are interdependent, okay? And when we talk about ecosystem, it's not just enough for you to have an ecosystem that you're part of just by default. You should be developing your own ecosystem to support that venture. You can connect to other ecosystems, but you should have one that you drive for your venture. Now, having said that, you can see that we have key points that you learned in this module. And again, I just kind of expressed in general the relationship between the venture and the business ecosystem. What I want you to do now, and in which the facilitator will moderate, is for you to discuss specifics of the key points that are listed here. So for each one, describe what we mean. What are the characteristics of sustainable business models? What a seed model is and how to use it. And then, of course, analogies and metaphors and things related to natural and business ecosystems and how they function similarly. So I'm going to be put on pause by the facilitator, and they will allow for the discussion. And then when you're finished, I will come back and I will debrief it. Okay, so let me do the summary, and I really hope that as you've gone through this particular module, and certainly I hope through all the modules, that your mind is beginning to change about certain things and how things flow. As you begin to flow in this methodology, you're obviously still going to have challenge, but you're going to see that within yourself and within what you do, that life begins to take hold of you. You get into it and you start seeing results. Now, I will say that, again, as I have said before, if you're just taking this for training and you don't have any immediate use for it, it's good information. It's solid. It's there. You have some new knowledge. But this is not just an information system. It's not just a training system. It is actually a system that helps you bring something to life. And so it's with your engagement that you're going to find success. Okay, and I just wanted to really emphasize that. So first of all, you learned about characteristics of sustainable business models. And a few things, they add value rather than extract, and there's a reciprocal exchange of value. They build legacy, they grow, multiply, adapt, and evolve. You also learned that a seed model consists of internal and external factors, and that you can actually have many seed model types: project, process, product. You can have different levels. You can have multiple business models in a company at the enterprise level, for example, and at different product and service levels. Sustainable, natural, and business ecosystems do function similarly. They consist of living and non-living actors and both individuals and group actors. They include members, those that produce, those that consume, and those that are decomposers, and really those that are just creating this virtual cycle of taking what others consider waste, again, and make it good and something that helps others in that ecosystem. They exhibit forest or business-related changes as the environment shifts. They have layers and subsystems. They contain value chains and healthy ecosystems. In both cases are robust, resilient, and diverse. So I'm sure that you also came up with many other points, and that's really good because that's indicating that you understand what's going on. But this is the end of the module. So again, it's the end of the module. I look forward to seeing you for Module 6. And this is Lori Elliott signing off.